right, sounds good. Let's do
Howdy,
this.
howdy, y'all. Welcome back to some antics. I guess some antics. I should probably emphasize that a bit better. I'm Ben Myers, and I'm joined today by my friend Todd Libby. Todd, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Doing pretty all right. I'm looking forward to round two of some antics. And I'm super excited to have you on because you, uh, I think in many ways, you encompass just a whole bunch of the things that I absolutely love about front end. You are a self declared front end nerd. That's a non trivial amount of your branding. And you're part of the W3C. You contribute to the accessibility guidelines. Like, why don't you tell me about yourself? Just because this is all super cool stuff, and I feel like I don't even really know the full breadth of what you do.
Well, I am uh long in the tooth, I will say, as far as my experience goes. Um, it's been over 20 years that I've been doing web development, web design on the internet. I've been programming since I was 9, so that was a very long time ago. Uh, what, 40? Yeah, been like 41 years now programming. I learned basic on a Commodore 64, fell in love with programming, been doing it ever since. Lately, in my professional time, uh, it's been a good emphasis on front end, but I've done back end, plenty of back end stuff as well, with the focus on accessibility. And I love to joke around. If if anybody follows me on Twitter, they know that. um, and I have an affinity for lobster rolls. That's also apparent on my Twitter timeline. But yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Love talking accessibility. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Just
All right.
you know, trying to make the web a better place, one one line of code at a time, I guess.
We have Chan in the chat, further emphasizing in all caps lobster rolls with many Z's. So it looks like there is some mutual affection for lobster rolls in the chat. Absolutely incredible. Chan's actually asking you, what is the best lobster roll ever?
Best lobster roll ever. Uh I would have to say that 2 foot long lobster roll I had very recently. Uh it was 2 feet long. I think I advertised it as three, but it was actually two, so I kind of lied. Uh, and it had 1.25 pounds of lobster meat in it. So that comes out to 6.25 pounds of lobster meat. And that was at the Taste of Maine restaurant in Woolwich, Maine.
That is absolutely incredible. And I also want to extend a very, very heartfelt apology to my friend Shepard, who is in the chat. Very, very disappointed that we are bringing up food during the lunch hour. So Shepard, I'm sorry. Um, we've got Alan in the chat as well. Alan saying that we're gonna need a bigger boat. Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and we have Anubis the Jackal says the best lobster roll ever is the next one. That
Usually, I've only met two lobster rolls I didn't like. And the key to a good lobster roll is if you're close to the coast and you're at a restaurant or a lobster shack, and if the lobster roll is usually over $20, you're in for a treat.
all right. Uh Shepard's back in the chat asking who in the chat wants to drop their jobs and start a lobster roll of restaurant with them. Yeah, I think we're starting something. This is happening. There is a lobster roll restaurant happening beneath our noses. I will say that the earliest memory I can have of having lobster was, and I'm sure I had it like earlier, like my parents let me try it, but my earliest memory that I have was we took a like general like New England trip, and we stopped in Kittery, Maine. There is
Okay.
a lobster place called Warren's there, where
Yep.
like and I'm sure this is pretty like standard for Maine of like, oh, you can look outside the window, like you've got a lobster shop on the coast. You can look outside the window and see the people bringing in your meal from like fresh from the sea. But yeah, no, I had um lobster there, super buttery, just incredibly good. Y'all, I apologize once again for lobstering up your lunch hour with imaginary lobster that we cannot taste. Um, yeah, cool. So, one thing that I did want to talk to y'all or talk to you about was you're in the World Wide Web Consortium. Do you want to kind of talk about what that experience is like, what you do with the W3C?
It has been a very enlightening uh, trip into how the W3C works. I am in the Silver Community Group, and also I'm in a few subgroups as well. One being Visual Contrast of Text subgroup. Another is the Functional Needs subgroup. And we meet at different times during the week, and we discuss whatever is on the agenda for that meeting. Like for the Silver Community Group, the working draft was just released, and um, so we had a big celebration in our meeting for that day. And the people are great. It's very welcoming, very kind community. You have your debates, as you will in every community, but for the most part, I've had a blast working on and helping out as much as I've been able to, with the WCAG guidelines.
Mhm.
And another subgroup I'm in is the errors subgroup, and that I've been doing some work in as well. So it's been real fun. I would suggest anybody that's interested in, the web content accessibility guidelines to, you know, come on in and you know, join in. All you have to do, you can be you can be an individual. You don't have to be a company. You can come in, sit in on a meeting, and see what goes on. And it's a really fun journey, and it's been real fun for me.
I was actually gonna ask, right? Because like I've been in the industry for a small handful of years, right? Like I could count the number of years I've been in the industry on my hands, which is saying something because I have slightly fewer digits than most. Um, and I was gonna ask like how does just a day-to-day web developer get involved uh, with the W3C, with the web content accessibility guidelines? Like how does someone get involved if you haven't previously been involved in any specs work?
That you would go to, and I'm looking it up right now, so I can get the membership join. So there is there are ways. What I'm looking at right now is basically how a company would sign up. But if you go, I will copy and paste this right into the chat here.
Awesome.
So there's that. That's for companies. Individuals like myself, I sat in on a meeting. Oh boy, I can't. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can remember how I did that.
Hmm.
I went in and I sat in on a meeting, and just from there kept going to meetings, and they added me to the W3C. You don't have to pay anything as an individual. Um, and there's somewhere on there. Oh, you do have to sign up. I would have to get that
Hmm.
later, and so we're not stuck on anything. But yeah, do you sign up on the site, and from there you would go in and you're, made a member
Okay.
from there. And I'll get that link to you later.
Well, cool. That actually like it's interesting to hear that it's more approachable than I would have thought. Right? Like you have an organization that's responsible for putting together like all the standards and specs that make up, the web, make the web work. And it's weird that like oh, I guess I'm personally surprised to hear that yeah, basically it's just a come on in, happy to have you kind of deal. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, it's very easy. It's not, it's nothing involved, and you don't go through some rigorous test or anything. It's just, they welcome people to come in, and they also welcome people to, if you don't want to join, they welcome input on, for instance, the WCAG uh
Hmm.
guidelines and standards. So,
All right.
they very open, very, very open. Great bunch of people as well.
Well, cool. Let me go ahead and show off a couple more links for you personally. Just kind of show off all the things you do. Go follow Todd on Twitter. It's absolutely worth your while. At Todd Libby. I put the link in the chat a while ago. Todd, you also do some writing. This is your site at toddl.dev. Um,
Yep.
you've got some really cool stuff in here. I believe, and I'm not saying it here, but I believe you recently wrote an article about color contrast that was also good. I believe it was. Did you do color contrast? What was it? What am I
I
thinking of?
did. It's let's see.
Yeah,
Yes, right there.
here it is. Um,
And I also gave a talk at Bar Camp Philly in November on it.
ooh, okay. Is that talk anywhere?
Yes, it is. That is. Let me pull that up.
Would it be on the Front End Nerdery YouTube channel by any chance?
It would be, yes.
Oh, well,
Thank you.
conveniently, I have that up as well. Look at that. Got tons of links. Speaking of front end nerdery, this is a podcast. This is also the name of a podcast that you do. So far, you've got a two-parter up with Jeffrey Zeldman. I really, really enjoyed this. You were talking about just generally web standards and the role that web standards have played in the web dev community over time. I thought it was super interesting. I heavily recommend giving this a listen if that's the kind of thing that excites you.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I just did episode 2. Well, 3. It'll be numbered 3, but
Mm-hmm.
my second guest was on, and that's going to be uploaded just as soon as I get transcripts and captioning done, because I put the video version over on the YouTube channel as well.
Mm-hmm. I gotta say, like, there's absolutely no way I'm putting up content without captions, but also it takes so much time. Um, yeah.
It does, yeah, it does. But I have found that Descript helps, and that's descript.com, I believe.
Yeah, here it is. Stick that in the chat. Put that in my show notes for later. There you go. Yeah, and this is a general tool for editing audio, video, podcasts, stuff like that, writing transcripts. Does lots of very cool stuff. And I've been toying around with this as well. On your recommendation as well as Cat's.
Yeah, it's great. It's you get 14 hours of free captioning, and then after that you have to pay for it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very reasonably priced, so yeah.
For sure. All right. So let's get into the meat of what we want to talk about today. You mentioned a couple times the web content accessibility guidelines. Let's say
Mhm.
I'm a fairly new web developer. Let's say I've never heard of the web content accessibility guidelines or WCAG. Would you give a quick pitch for WCAG and what it is, what it does?
Sure. The WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are a wide variety of recommendations that are made for web content to be more accessible to people with disabilities. Adhering to those guidelines ensures that websites and applications are accessible to people with a wide variety of disabilities, such as low vision, motor skill or cognitive disabilities, speech disabilities, sensory disorders, and so forth. Um, they address a number of different mediums of static content on the web, and each guideline provides information on accessibility practices that address documented needs of users with disabilities. And the guidelines are supported by outcomes, and an outcome is they are results from practices that reduce or eliminate barriers that people with disabilities experience on the web.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So what we're looking at here is the current W3C recommendation version of the WCAG, which is version 2.1.
Mhm.
As I understand it, 2.2 is almost here. Probably sometime this year it'll become the recommendation, right? Um,
Yes.
and then you've been working on 3.0, which is I shared the link to that earlier, but I'll share that again. Um, and this just entered its first public draft.
Yes, it did. It did. Uh, it won't be available until it probably won't be available to use until 2023, I believe it is.
Okay, wow, that is quite a ways out. Um,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so we've got this big document. I've sent out the link. We got this big document, and if I just look down the sidebar, right, there's a ton of links here. This is something that I personally would probably find pretty overwhelming. So, how would you recommend, if you're now aware that there are guidelines out there, like how do you use this document? How do you get this to help your like actually produce concretely more accessible sites? Where do you start?
Well, I would start with reading through what you have there. I would probably go with the background. I would basically start from the introduction, to be honest with you. It is some involved reading, and you have to have patience. Now, granted, the language for 2.x is it can be difficult to read if you're not a very technical person. So say, and I don't want to, you know, point fingers at any individual group of people or anything. But if you're a designer, say, uh, and you don't have that technical background, reading this might be a little daunting. So a lot of patience, and just start from the top and work your way down. I would read a section every day. That's how I did it when I started. I read a section a day. I took notes. I asked questions. And if anybody's got any questions for me, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I'd be more than happy to answer them there. Um, and a little note that 3 will be easier to read than 2.x's.
Interesting.
But what we see here on the screen is I look at it and I say, that's a lot of information.
Mhm.
um And if you don't want to read the boring stuff, which I would suggest people do, read that introduction all the way down to where it says perceivable. If you want to skip that and you want to go right to text alternatives, just read, start reading that. Um, but you'll be skipping over some content you probably want to read. But if you go from there, what we're looking at here for non-text content, for instance, read through that, and then there's that little box to the right there that says understanding non-text content and how to meet non-text content. You want to read those as well. That gives you an understanding, like what we see here. My um, my dive into that, I didn't have CodePen at the time. So I would suggest people take, because you have towards the bottom, there is some examples of failures, as well as some examples of, there you see the examples there. Um, take, for instance, here we got a linked thumbnail image, for instance, which is number 9. Take that, throw it in a CodePen, throw it in a pen, and work on it. Make it accessible. Do a check on it. You can use your browser dev tools. There's lots of tools out there, which I guess we can go over whenever. And yeah, just go from there. Work your way down the list. Having a good understanding of each guideline will help. Don't overwhelm yourself. If you got to do one at a time, do one at a time. Do one a day. And it will give people a good understanding of what we need to do to be inclusive and accessible, and produce that kind of content for people with disabilities.
Awesome. So, kind of taking a look at the anatomy of just like what we have seen here, we have kind of this like hierarchy here of the guidelines, because we're here in this section called perceivable. Then we're looking at guidelines. Like right now, I've got guideline 1.2, time-based media, like pulled up. It gives us a very like high level idea, basically, which is like, oh, you should have an alternative for time-based media. Like that's very high level. Then we're talking about, I see a whole bunch of success criteria, which seem to be much more specific requirements. Each success criterion has links to learn more about like how you would actually implement that. So that's what we were just looking at. This is a link to learn more about an individual criterion. Um, and then I want to call out, because we have a question about this in the chat. Um, there's a level A here, and I've seen on a couple of others there's like level double A, and then there's also triple A. Do you want to kind of talk through those 3 levels real quick? What
So
that means?
those,
Sorry,
go
what
ahead.
that means in general? Those levels.
So the levels, and I don't want to phrase this wrong, so I'm going to pull up the site and go directly from the site. So just a second. So you have certain criterion, is what they call success criterion or criteria now. You have A, double A, triple A. A being a subset of double A, and then triple A is kind of like, the cherry on top of the ice cream. You know, um, there are a certain amount of criteria you have to meet to reach level A, and so on and so forth. So you have a certain number to reach A, and then you have a certain amount more to reach double A, and then a certain amount more to reach triple A. So, for example, say level A, you're not allowed to identify something by color alone, like press the green button to proceed. Um, double A, you want to be a little more you want to ensure that the text meets the color contrast requirements, which currently is a scoring system of ratios. So that ratio is 4.5 to 1, which is optimal. Level A, I believe, is 3 to 1. And you want to meet these these levels. So there's some that are minimal, some that are for double A that are like middle of, trying to put this uh like standard, I want to say. And then triple A is a very strict meaning of the requirements. So for triple A, it's currently 10 to 1, I believe,
Oh
as a
wow.
ratio.
Oh, that's huge. Okay, that's big.
So 10 to 1 is actually where we should be. 10 to 1 is an optimal, and I don't want to dive too deep into it, for time's sake, but fonts have, different widths, sizes, faces, and there are a lot more people that are better suited to describe that than I am. But color contrast is not, and I'm trying to remember how it was phrased to me. Basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but color contrast is not contrast. It is how our brains perceive what we're looking at. And the scoring system will be changing with WCAG 3.
Okay.
So there's a little sneak peek into what's going on with 3.
We have Alan in the chat. Alan's asking if it's possible to be too contrasty. Like, for instance, would black text on pure white be a problem? I don't think so,
Yeah,
right?
not currently. I guess there again, it depends on the font. If you have a very skinny font and it's of a size that is not large enough, and I believe 18 pixels is the minimum. You can have, here's a good example. I recently, well, this actually was the impetus behind my color contrast research, and my article and my talk. I was filling out a form, and I don't know if it's I don't know if I put the image in that article or not, but there's a good example right there. The black text in a text field on a dark blue background with a blue background that is very hard even for me to read. So you can imagine somebody with cataracts trying to read that. It's nearly impossible. And I think there might be, if you scroll down that page a little more, or maybe not, I didn't maybe put that in there, but it was a yellow, it was a yellow background with white text in a text field, and that was just impossible to read. Um,
Ah,
Black. Oh, there it is, right there.
wild. This is a thing that you just like found out in the wilderness?
Yeah, it was actually on a website that I had signed up for a newsletter for, and that's what
Incredible.
I was presented after I signed up. So that's don't ever do that. You can see the black text on there. It's kind of there's some contrast there. Uh, Black on white, usually not. To answer the
Mhm.
question, usually black on white text is okay if the font is big enough and if the font is of a width in a weight that is good enough to pass um, as far as contrast goes.
The chat is actively complaining that their eyes hurt, so I'm going to scroll away from that now. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a bit about the guidelines and what the purposes of them. We did talk a bit about level A, double A, triple A. And Chan in the chat actually made a comparison to like it's almost like the 3 stars you could get in a mobile app like Angry Birds. Of like, oh, you have to get the first star to be able to get the second star. You have to get the second star to get the third star, right? You're like, there's these levels of scoring basically. Um, and my understanding is a lot of companies, basically the industry standard is striving for level double A, but by default.
Yes, minimal is A, acceptable is double A,
Hmm.
and optimal is triple A.
That's a great way to think of it. Um, I I like that a lot. Minimal is A, uh, acceptable is double A, and optimal is triple A. Wow. Okay, that's a great way to phrase that. Okay,
Yeah,
so let's dive into using this as a day-to-day developer. Specifically, you've written a CSS Tricks article about one particular requirement, which is label in name. So we're going to use that as an example today. So
okay.
this is success criterion 2.5.3. So I'm gonna go find that. In the meantime, do you want to kind of tell us what this criterion is?
Sure. So when we are creating forms, we want to make sure that our labels are read by not only screen reading software such as VoiceOver for Mac, JAWS or NVDA for Windows, or even Orca for Linux, um, that it's also clear and concise for people that use such, voice recognition, for instance, Dragon Naturally, and software like that. So when navigating around, they can find the label, um, and it will be announced to them, or they can say, and I think it's somewhere in there where it's, um, you know, uh, send, and they'll be right on the send button, for instance. You want to remember that, we're not all, good vision, good hearing. There are lots of assistive technologies out there that people use, that people need. And we have to make sure that we're being, as I said earlier, inclusive to those people, not to leave them feeling left out.
Mhm.
So this kind of dives into the words, which, as it says in here, the words which a label has visually on the component that are also included in the words that are associated with the component programmatically. Uh, you know, you want to have a button that says submit, and you can use a button. Let me look at one of the examples that I had. So, for instance, in the code pen on that page, uh, I have an example, find in this site on the button. Um, and the label is the same. So you want to be able to say the screen reader, or, however the person is navigating the site. Say, for instance, it's a keyboard. They're using the screen reader and the keyboard, and they get to that button, and the button announces find in this site. So they can go, oh, this is how I search for something in this site. So they're going to, press the input, and they get to wherever they need to go,
Actually,
which is the gist of it.
gonna go ahead and just create a sample file with this example that you've given so we can play around with this bigger. This should probably be in a form because semantics are important. All right. And get the alignment just right. Then I'm gonna spin up browser sync, and browser sync will let me, oh, okay, it's gonna take me all the way over there. Just gonna copy this, put it in here. Okay, so we have here, do you want to kind of talk us through what this example is that you've given us?
Okay, so you have your form. That form has a hidden label because, let's say, for argument's sake, you don't need to see the same text twice. And you don't have room in that form to have the text above that button show. And in this case, you don't want that text to show. So that label is going to be hidden with CSS.
Okay.
Then on the submit, you have that value find in this site. What's going to happen is that hidden label will be read by the screen reader, which will announce to the user that button is find in the site, so they can find whatever they need in that site, on that site.
All right. And is this currently, like, is this one of the examples that would violate 253 label and name, or is this, no, this actually seems like it would pass that, right?
Yes,
Okay.
those code pens do pass. Yes.
Gotcha. So, would you be willing to throw together a quick example here in our HTML of something that might fail this, and we can kind of explore why it's failing? I can pull up voiceover. We can.
Yeah, absolutely.
You still in the?
So we have.
Gotcha.
Let me. Let's just rearrange my VS Code here for a second.
Not
All
a
right.
problem.
So we have the label here. A very simple, I guess, method of fouling this up would be just doing this.
Okay.
Because the label does not match the value of the button. You want to make sure your labels, and this is in a div, but you can also have, it can be in a label. Whoops. Mess that up.
Oh yeah, I'll let you do that. I'll back up.
All right.
Pair
So-
programming. There we go.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, you can do that.
All right.
We'll go back here. This is not going to pass.
Okay.
What will happen is this label will be read search by the screen, or it should be read. You should hear search when the button says find in this site.
Gotcha. So if I'm, for instance, a user who uses like a voice control, like you mentioned, Dragon Naturally Speaking, and I'm looking at this, right? Like I'm expecting probably this button to be called search, right? Because that's what I see this label as, right? And so I'm gonna say like button search, or I'll say click search, or I'm not actually familiar with Dragon all that much. I've never tested with it. But I could say search, and it's not gonna find this button because this button is announced as something else.
Correct.
Okay. So another example that I know you've given in the post is it's, let's say I've got like a button here, right? And inside this button, I give this the text send.
Yep.
And then I apply, I'm very accessibly minded here, right? And so I'm going to provide a whole bunch of like extra context. So I'm going to say like this is submit form, right? Like I'm going over and beyond, right, to provide screen reader support, right? So I'm going to say that this is submit form. And so now we have a button that visually says send, but if I pull out VoiceOver, we'll see how well VoiceOver works with everything else I've got pulled up right now. But if I pull up VoiceOver, which is a screen reader built into Mac, that allegedly should open up. It might not, but actually, you know what? I'll force it to. We're gonna make this happen.
Command F5.
Oh, there it is. Oh,
VoiceOver on Chrome, now in Stream Map.
okay. So I've got VoiceOver up. This is a screen reader as might be used by someone who is low vision or blind or perhaps dyslexic. It'll read the contents of the page aloud as you navigate through it. So if I navigate to this button using VoiceOver, we're gonna hear
now in document, Google Chrome, semantics, leaving document, Google Chrome, semantics, entering document web content, submit form button. You are currently on a button.
So at the end there, y'all might have caught that it said submit form button. It doesn't actually say send, right? So this right here is, as I understand it, the problem that the success criterion is identifying, right? Is we're showing one thing visually, and yet behind the scenes, the button is being called something else that a user might not predict.
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly it. Yep. So you can use now also regarding ARIA, there are places where you want to use ARIA, but as somebody had said to me, and this somebody named Bruce Lawson, who I highly recommend you follow, not only for his accessibility stuff, but also
VoiceOver off.
his jokes on Twitter at Bruce L. The first rule of ARIA Fight Club is not to use ARIA.
Incredible.
So there are cases, like I said, where you want to use ARIA, but for the most part, if you don't need to use it, don't use it.
For sure. So we've created a situation here where we have a control that someone might want to use, and it says one thing, but behind the scenes, it's really named another thing. And we've seen how that might cause confusion, right? Because if I'm using like voice control software like Dragon, I would have to just know that I'm supposed to say click submit form, right? I'm just supposed to know that. And so I guess the question I want to ask now is, how can we use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to learn more about this issue and then remediate it?
So in this case, there is a few things that you can do. Proper labeling is basically the key that we want to do here. You can change that ARIA label to say send. You could change the text on the button to what do we have? Submit form. So we could do either of those two things. Matching them is key. That's the first thing you want to do. you don't necessarily have to use that ARIA label with a button. And I believe that it can be read that way, and that should be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to give that a spin again
Yeah.
and see what we got.
Let's see. So for being a little laggy again, let's open up. There we go.
VoiceOver on System Preferences, Accessibility Window, Accessibility Features Table. Leaving document, Google Chrome, Semantics. Entering document web content. Submit form button. You are currently on a button inside of web content.
Yeah. So it did say submit form button, and if I were to open up, if you've never used VoiceOver before, one of the cool features it has is the rotor, which will help you just quickly iterate through all the different elements of a given type on the page. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the rotor.
Form controls menu.
So you can see that it has like a button called submit form. So it's getting all that just by virtue of having the name. So okay, Todd, let's say I've done a bad, right, and I've made our like inaccessible version, right? I was trying to be helpful. I had that ARIA label equals submit form. My button said send, right? I've done a bad thing, right? And let's say I submit this to accessibility auditors, and they come back and they say, this is a problem. You just violated success criterion 2.5.3. What do I do from here? How would I solve this problem, like just by looking through WCAG?
Well, you can, look up 2.5.3. You could read that article that I wrote, or, take it upon yourself to read through the guidelines and say, okay, this is what I have to do. Like when we were, on the guidelines and it had understanding,
VoiceOver off.
whatever criterion we were on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, going to understanding and going to that other link as well. You could do that. HTML by, right out of the box is accessible. Granted, there are a few things that have issues like everything else. But for the most part, HTML is accessible right out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Is it perfect? No. But, nothing's perfect. So, fixing what you want to do is you want to fix the problems right away. So, as I alluded to earlier, there are ways to also check your accessibility issues with DevTools.
Okay.
And you're in Chrome, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Chrome has the Chrome DevTools that you can look up. There's a tab that usually is there's an accessibility tab that you can use.
Give this a bit. Okay, and that's yeah. So I'm here in the Elements tab, and I come down to this bottom pane here that usually like you would look at to see like your computed styles and stuff. And hidden away in this caret, there's an accessibility tab. So if I were to like inspect our button here, we would be able to see all the different accessibility goodies for this button. It's really small. Okay, cool. So if I had wanted to debug this and figure out what's being exposed to assistive technology, I could inspect the accessibility pane here, is what you're saying?
Yeah, you could look at the accessibility tree. You can look at the pane there that you have open. A couple of extensions that I use are the Axe extension from DQ. That is a very useful tool, very handy tool. So if you do, yep.
There we go. Awesome. So I could scan all of my page. It's gonna give me 3 issues out of the box. Oh yeah, it's complaining that I don't have a main, I don't have a heading. Yeah, okay. It's complaining about the basic like HTML scaffolding. That's enjoyable. Um, yeah, so Axe is great. And in fact, every time I look at Axe, because it provides like more information, and I could click this link here that said more info, and it usually like I found will point you towards WCAG criterion, um,
Hmm.
somewhere in here I think usually, which is extremely cool. So there's I think multiple discovery paths to learn more about like, hey, there's an issue here, right? Where would I go to find more? Well, you could check Axe and therefore the references. You could check WCAG itself. Um, Tons of blog posts out there. You mentioned your own. I imagine for just about any success criterion out there, there's a good blog post from you or from Adrian Roselli or Steve Faulkner or Sarah Higley. Just like so many great resources out there that'll tackle basically any criterion you need.
Lots of it, yeah. And those are the people you want to follow on Twitter as well, because they always have,
Mm-hmm.
there's always, they're always tweeting something out, accessibility related.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, DQ has this Axe plugin. Uh, is the Wave plugin. That's very handy as well. That is the one I usually run first.
Interesting. That's it.
That's it. Yep.
We'll send that.
So, like for instance, if you put, and it may be a bad example, but if you in that area there for the web page address, if you put in my site, for instance, um,
No, toddl.dev. There we go.
so it's
Oh,
going
look
to
at
come up
that.
with
Oh, I've
I
never
have
actually
an
seen this before.
I have an alert. I don't know what that alert is, but
View detail, long alternative text.
oh, okay.
Interesting.
Okay. So if you click on that icon underneath where it says long alternative text on the right, it's going to take you, it should take you to, well, it has that, yep. But there,
Yeah, it should take you to like where the issue is, right?
yeah, that should take you to the issue, which is for,
Oh, it looks like it's
yeah,
here.
that's a little too much. I have to fix that. But yeah, I think 100 characters is the optimal amount for alt text. And you always want to have alt
Mhm.
text, even if it's empty alt text for
Mhm.
images. And of course, there's different kinds of decorative text. It doesn't get alt text, it gets an empty
Mhm.
alt text. So it's alt equals, double quotes, and that's it.
All right. Cool. Well, we're running close to the end of time, and I still had a couple questions I wanted to ask you all, ask you
Okay.
about, and that's specifically around WCAG 3. So first of all, why do the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines need a V3? Like that, like having a new major version, right? Like that's a pretty big deal. Why does WCAG need a V3?
It needs a V3 to address some things that have not been addressed. It needs a V3 to make it easier for people to learn and understand the guidelines. Um, there are more disability needs out there, so it will allow for those different types of disabilities to be supported by new guidelines. It provides flexibility for the new guidelines to keep up with new technologies. And it is the guidelines will reflect real world accessibility issues, making catering to low impact issues, for instance, or bugs, or something to that nature. There are some changes, like I said earlier about scoring. It's moving from A, double A, triple A to bronze, silver, and gold. And right now, the focus is on bronze. Silver and
Oh,
gold is quite a ways off. Um, Success criteria will just be we're moving away from success criteria to outcomes. Um,
interesting.
so success criteria are true or false statements about the content of a web page. An outcome is a statement about the need of a certain user's yeah, it's is a statement about the need of certain users for specific types of content. That's what an
Okay.
outcome is. And outcomes will be rated from 0, which is very poor, to 4, which is excellent. So it's going to be like a 4-star rating, kind of like Uber or Lyft, for instance. Each outcome defines what is considered a critical error, and that'll be explained more. That's something that I'm reading into more as well. Right now, as it stands, 2.2 is backwards compatible, and I use that in quotes, with 2.1, and that is backwards compatible with 2. Once 3 comes, these major changes, it's going to be, like every software development, it's a new version. So, it's exciting. I think it's very exciting that we have a new scoring system. There are some things that are coming down the pipe that are very exciting to me. That being the scoring change in color contrast. I think it's a lot better.
Okay.
So
We
I don't
actually,
know if that answered your question or not.
I think that's really interesting. And Chan in the chat says that it seems like the distinction between criterion and outcome to him feels like the difference between a unit test versus an end-to-end test.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
gotcha.
I would agree with it. Yeah.
This is something. So I actually have not actually had the chance to take a look at the WCAG 3 draft. So this was something I didn't know. I had heard about the bronze, silver, gold change, and I think that's great. I think that's going to be so much more approachable and easy to talk about. With like it's easy for me to go my product owner and go, if we do this, we're going to meet bronze. We could do this and meet silver. Like that's infinitely more compellable than or infinitely more compelling than A, double A, triple A.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And buy-in is key. And when I do my advocating, especially with stakeholders, management, team leaders, it's always you get those people to buy into it and to buy into accessibility, and from there you work on the team that's handling this part and the team that's handling that part, developers or designers and such. It makes things so much better, and it makes development so much faster and easier for everybody. And another key with stakeholders and managers is you don't want to lose out on revenue. So you want to make things accessible.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we are close to time. Thank you so much for hopping on, Todd. Todd, is there anything more you want to say? Anything you wanna tell our fine viewers before we go?
Yeah, make things accessible. It helps everybody. Um, eh, you know, Start from kickoff to handoff, and accessibility doesn't stop at handoff. Accessibility is always ongoing, so it goes beyond handoff. Uh, and Yeah, any questions? Feel free to hit me up on Twitter. At Todd Libby. Be more than happy to answer any questions. You can follow me there. I have a lot of stuff that I'm doing that's coming up soon this year, as a matter of fact. So, follow me and stay tuned.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on, Todd. And thank you to all of you who joined the stream. I'll catch y'all next week. Next week it's just gonna be me. I'm gonna be doing an introduction to 11D, which is by far and away my favorite static site generator. If you've never done anything with static site generators or 11D in particular, feel free to come by. I'm gonna make it as approachable as possible because 11D is super rad. So I will catch y'all 12 p.m. CST next Tuesday. Have a good one, y'all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Ben.